to start with. Adam and Chava, he could have created initially Adam and Chava. No, first created Adam. And then later, he created Chava from Adam. So the Gemara asks, why is it that the creation of the human being was different than the rest of the creation, that Hashem created only one person? And the answer in the Gemara is that this is to teach us a lesson. Just like then, Adam was the only one in the world, which means everything in the world at that time was connected to him. Everything is about him because he's the only one there. So we should know that even later, when Hashem created a world with millions and millions of people, nevertheless, every person has to view his relationship with Hashem as if it would be that he is the only one. That's what it means. Because very often we have this thought, okay, I'm not doing it, someone else is doing it. There are a lot of people out there. I don't have to do everything I do. Other people are doing that, and big deal, I don't count so much. But if I would be the only person in the world, of course I count. I'm the only one around. That's the way it was when Adam was created. And that's what these words mean. A person shouldn't look at himself as I'm just one piece of a huge, a huge world of people, but it's as if the whole world was created for me. And it's not as if. There's a certain aspect where we all contribute and we're all a piece in the puzzle. There's nobody in this world that's just here randomly, that Hashem opened up the heavens and some neshamas fell down. Everybody's here with a purpose. Hashem designed me personally to be here in this world, in this time in history, to these set of parents, in this country, and in this city. All that is because I have a certain purpose. And I feel it's like a puzzle. If there's one piece missing, the whole puzzle is not complete. And we're all part of that puzzle. So in a certain way, yes, the world is created. I have to look at myself as an individual and not like whatever I do doesn't matter, just part of the whole thing. Number 4. I'll do number 5 first, and then we'll do number 4. There's halacha with tzedakah. Remember, we learned the Rambam about tzedakah. And the question was, what if there are different people asking me for tzedakah? What are the rules? Who has priority? Who should I have to give first? So the rules are, this is the quote from Gemara, Aniye ircha koidna, the poor of your city come first. Which means if there are poor people in my city that need tzedakah, and there are poor people in another city that need tzedakah, and they both come to me, I don't have enough for both. What's my obligation? The obligation is to give those that are in your city, because the fact that they live in my city means I have more of a responsibility towards them. And that doesn't only apply to city, it also applies to people. That there's somebody that I'm connected to, I'm related to, and they need, and there's another person who I'm not related to, and they also need, I have more responsibility to give to the person that's related to me. Because they're related to me, I have more responsibility to reach out to them and help them. But the general idea that the closer they are to me, the more responsible I am, falls under the category of this quote, Aniye ircha koidman, the poor of your own city, they come first. So what's number 4? Number 4 is a quote in Gemara that actually has halachic ramifications. The literal meaning of the words are, a person is related to themselves. What does that mean? So there's an interesting halacha that we all know that in a bezdin, in the Jewish court, it goes according to Torah, a witness is disqualified if he's related to one of the parties. So if someone comes to court and he testifies that this person did something and he's related, we don't go by his testimony. Based on that, the halacha is that even if I come to court and I testify that I did something wrong, for example, my testimony is not accepted, and this is the reason given, because a person is related to himself and a relative is disqualified. So the point that we have from this is that the people that are related to me, that are closer to me, I have more responsibility towards my own children, my own spouse, my own family members, my community members. I'm more obligated towards them than others. Then certainly I have an obligation to myself because I'm the closest to myself. So again, this is all to bring out the idea that according to Torah, let's not confuse the word selfish with responsibility. I do have a divine responsibility to provide for myself, for my children, for my family, for my community, for my close circles. Number 6 is also a halacha. No one should ever have to make this choice, but there's a question in Gemara that there's 2 people in the desert, and there's only enough water for one of them. I have a bottle of water just for myself. If it were to be shared, nobody could live. But if one person drinks the water, they could survive. And, desert is a place where there's no water. And if you continue walking there without water, the person won't survive. Do I have an obligation to share it or to give it away? Or do I keep the water for myself? What's the halacha? That's what it means. Chayecha koydem, your life comes first. Not because the Torah says you have to be selfish, but because that's your responsibility. Hashem put me here on earth, and I have to take care of me, the body and soul that I have.
Question.
Yes.
Would that also mean that the other person is obligated to try to take that water from you to survive? Because they're obligated to try to help themselves. So,
yeah, but they're not allowed to steal it from me, especially if this would not allow the other one to live.
What if you're both equal distance and you reach for it at the same time?
And you're saying the water doesn't belong to any of them. If the water is hefker, it doesn't belong to any one of them, then they can both, try to get the water. But if it belongs to one of them, I have no right to take it away. Yes, sir.
Why didn't this apply to your children? You're in a situation where you have to either choose yourself or your children.
I don't know. I don't know. And no one should ever know the halacha. Should never have to use that kind of halacha. But I hear your point. Your point is that this is someone that I'm responsible to, just like myself. This is part of me. It's an extension of me. What would be the halacha? I don't know. I'm going to skip for a second to number 10, because that's connected. And many people don't know that this is actually one of the commandments in the Torah. It's a mitzvah like any other mitzvah. And the mitzvah is, Shmarta ma'od l'nafshei seichem. You should protect your health, which means if somebody doesn't feel well, and the person is told you must see a doctor because you have a condition you don't know, you might need medication and you have to take care of your health. It's not just the right thing to do or a nice thing to do. It's literally one of the commandments in the Torah that a person has to protect their health. So we are responsible to protect our health, physical health, and we're responsible to protect our health, which is spiritual health. So this is all these things we mentioned. They're all different quotes from Chazal, from our sages, about how important it is to take care of myself. And now the question is, which is a very big question, a very broad question. So how much do I do for myself? How much do I do for others? And I think it's very difficult in a classroom to give a rule because there are no rules. Everybody's different. Every situation is different. And I think this is one of the areas where a person would probably need to consult with someone else who's objective, whether it's a Rav, whether it's a Mashpia, whether it's a close friend, but someone who's objective to tell me, am I going overboard or not? For example, tzedakah. I think we talked about this also when we spoke about tzedakah. That's the reason why you're not allowed to give away all your money for tzedakah, because you're also responsible to yourself and your family. So you're supposed to give tzedakah a tenth. If you want to go beyond the letter of the law, you give a fifth, but you're not allowed to give away all your money for tzedakah. Why? Because you have an obligation to provide for yourself. 8 and 9 is a little bit different. 8 and 9 there's another way of interpreting this Mishnah. If I'm not myself, who will be? It's another way of looking at it. And that is that very often people have this feeling that I don't really have to make much of an effort, especially if I look back and I say, well, my father learns Torah, my mother does mitzvahs, and my grandfather learned Torah, and they did mitzvahs, and everybody was doing, following a path of Torah mitzvahs. Then you say to yourself, okay, so I'm naturally just going to continue. I don't have to make an effort to be and do the things that are right to do. When the Mishnah says, if I'm not myself, who will be? It means I can't rely on the fact that others have Torah and others have mitzvahs and others have good deeds, even though that's very effective. But I have to do the work myself. I can't rely and say that just being around people that are good influence, I'll naturally be good influence, because we all have our own personal local Yetzer Hara, and we have our personal challenges. So therefore, I have to do the work myself. And that's what number 8 means. Read number 8. This is also from another place in Pirkei Avos. Haskein atzmacha lilmod Torah. Prepare yourself for the study of Torah, because Torah is not an inheritance. An inheritance means if my uncle had $1 million and he passed away, I automatically become $1 million richer overnight without any effort. Torah is not an inheritance that, if my father was this way, my grandfather was that way, my great-grandfather was this way, automatically I'll be that way. It doesn't work that way. I have to put the work in myself. And I say that somebody once came to a restaurant and he asked the man behind the counter, can I eat here? Is everything kosher properly? So he turns around and he points to the picture on the wall. You see a man with a long white beard. He says, that's my grandfather. So he said, yes, if you were hanging on the wall, then your grandfather would be standing here. I wouldn't have much of a question. But you're standing here and your grandfather's on the wall, so I want to know, could I eat the food in this place? Your grandfather doesn't help me. So we have to know that Torah is something that every person has to make the effort. It's not something which comes natural. And sometimes this is the reason why people actually, either they or their children lose it a little bit, because they take it for granted that if I'm this way, then the children will surely be that way. And it's not true. Effort has to be made that each individual should be the way they need to be. But you might say, isn't this a contradiction to another place where it says that Torah is inheritance? Number 9, Torah tziva lanu Moshe merosha kilis Yaakov. The Torah that Moshe commanded us is a heritage, which means it's an inheritance for the people of Israel, the congregation of Yaakov. So here it says it's not an inheritance, and here it says it is an inheritance. What would be the answer to that question? Any suggestions?
You always have the Torah there. It's always something you can go back to. But it's like, say you have the $1 million. You have the $1 million no matter what. It's just how much of it do you want to access? You can choose to access none of it by not learning it, or you can choose to access the full amount. So it's no matter what, it's yours. It's just, do you want it all?
So let me explain what Malka just said. Commentary. What Malka just said is like this. In essence, each one of us, we all have the connection to Torah. And it is like an inheritance. We wake up, a person is born, if we're born and they're from a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, we naturally have that connection to Torah. That's what it means when it says it's an inheritance. When it says it's not an inheritance, it means how much will I benefit consciously from Torah? It's as much as I invest, that's how much I'll take out. It's not something which to enjoy Torah and to appreciate Torah and to be able to really live up to the standards of Torah does not come like an inheritance. It's something which I have to work on it in order to achieve that. So there's a big difference. You know, there's a story. What? There's a story with the previous Rebbe that he started this project that during the summer which still goes on to this day, but this was in the 1940s. During the summer, the yeshiva students would go out to different cities in America, and they go to communities that didn't really have much of a, in those days, there was no such thing as Chabad house wherever you looked. There were very few. And in other places, there were no rabbis or communal leaders. People were on their own, and there was very little Yiddishkeit there. So these students would go out and to visit Jewish homes and try to bring some Yiddishkeit into the homes. So they went to Chicago, and somebody in Chicago, whether it was the rabbi or was the head of the community, brought them and introduced them to different people in the community where they went to visit. So one of the places that he went, he introduced them. He said, these boys are like Magiyim. Those are the words that he used, Magiyim. What's Magiyim? So he said years ago, in the small shtetl, little small villages and little small places, they couldn't afford to have a scribe, someone that could examine a Torah scroll or examine tefillin. So what do? If they had tefillin that need to be examined or a Torah scroll that need to be checked to see that it's kosher, they had no choice but to travel to the big city and bring it there to be checked. But there was another option. They were traveling sofrim, traveling scribes. They would travel from city to city, the small cities, the small villages, and they would say, we're here for a day or two or three. Whoever has tefillin or a Torah scroll that needs to be checked, bring it to the shul and we'll check it. And we finish, we'll go on to the next village. So they were traveling scribes. So this man concluded with this analogy and said, this were his words, every Jew has a Torah in their heart, but sometimes a letter gets erased, some of the ink gets scratched off. So they're coming here to fill in all the things that are missing, to make all the letters complete the way they're supposed to be. They were very inspired by his analogy. So when they wrote a report to the previous Rebbe about their trip, they put in this analogy, how he introduced them, because they thought it was very, very nice. So the Rebbe wrote back and said, the analogy is a nice, good analogy, but not accurate. Why isn't it accurate? Because the letters of Torah that are in the heart of every Jew could never be erased, could never be scratched off. They could be covered with dust. And then you need someone to blow off the dust that it should come out. Like letters that are engraved in a diamond, they don't get rubbed off, they don't get scratched off, but they can be covered with dust. So the same is with the Torah that's in the heart of every Yid. So every Jew has Torah, has a connection to Torah from the moment they're born, and that connection is eternal. But in terms of how much I'll consciously benefit from the Torah that I have, that depends on how much effort I'll make. So both things are true. One is that the Torah is an inheritance. The other is that I have to work in order to benefit from it in a conscious way. So that is the meaning, another meaning of these words. If I'm not for myself, who will be? So when it comes to spiritual growth, I can't rely on this one and rely on that one and say that it'll just come naturally by being around nice people and great people. It has to come through my own efforts and the work that I put in, that I invest. Any questions before we go on to the next piece? You're welcome to ask questions. Don't be afraid. Nothing's going to happen. Still no questions. Okay. So I guess there are no questions. So let's do Mishnah 14. Oh, this is Mishnah 14. Sorry. Let's do page 16. We have 5 minutes, so we can still do a little bit. Page 16, at least we'll start today and we can finish tomorrow. The words in the Mishnah is Im lo achshav emasai, if not now, when? What does that mean? The Mishnah is telling us basically, do not procrastinate. When there's something good to do it at the first opportunity that you have. We know that some people have an attitude, if I can do it tomorrow, why do it today? And the Torah says just the opposite. If you can do it today, don't put it off for tomorrow. And one of the reasons are perhaps if you don't do it today, you'll never have the opportunity again to do it tomorrow. Unfortunately, many times people leave things for later, and later they no longer have that opportunity. So in the Torah language, this is called zrizus. Zrizus means swiftness, to do things quickly. Now we had something like this in the beginning when we started Pirkei Avos. Let me ask the question again and see if we can get a clear answer. And that is, so does this mean when a person davens, they should daven fast? Person learns Torah, they should learn fast. But zrizus means to do things quickly. Remember, it says you should run like a deer. Number 4, run like a deer. So we should run like a deer when we're davening or learning or doing a mitzvah.
You run to the opportunity quickly, but you take the opportunity slowly and embrace it.
Very good. We run to shul to daven. I mean, in other words, when it comes to doing a mitzvah, I don't delay. I don't waste my time. I go ahead to do it as soon as I can. But the mitzvah itself, I have to do thoroughly, slowly, and give it all my attention. Yes, that's the difference. So it says that this is one of the things that Avram Avinu excelled in, that when it came to doing a mitzvah, he did it bizrizus. In fact, according to halacha, this is one of the reasons why there's certain mitzvahs that the proper time to do the mitzvah is the earliest time of the day. I remember once I was involved with someone who was just getting involved in Yiddishkeit, and he told me they had a very interesting episode. He was invited to a friend's bris, circumcision. Anyone know how to say circumcision in Spanish? Baruch Hashem. We have all the languages here. So he came to this person's house and he knocked on the door. It was at night, and the person opens the door and says, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And he said, "I hear there's a bris milah here. I came to participate." And the lady says, "I'm sorry, it was 8:30 this morning." 8:30 this morning. He never in his life heard of such a thing. Our weddings are in the evening, and our mitzvah is in the evening, and the bat mitzvah is in the evening. Who ever heard of an event 8:30 in the morning? But a bris milah and davening, these are some of the things that we do as early as we can in the morning. And the reason for that is because of this quote, number 3, Zrizim Magdimim the mitzvahs. That those that are quick, they do mitzvahs, the sooner the better. But there's a few other points why it's so important to do the mitzvah sooner. Besides the point that if I don't do it now, I might lose my opportunity. There's another reason, and we'll go into that tomorrow, Mirza Hashem. Okay.
Thank you.